I'm Kathleen Maher, and I work for Jon Peddie Research, and I write on the software side of Jon Peddie. Software side of Jon Peddie. I write about software, including media, entertainment, content creation software, computer-aided design software, and that sort of thing. What we follow is we track the pixel. So the stuff I look at tends to be the software that is stressed by the pixel.
And I track the hardware side mostly, a little bit of software with regard to drivers and things of that nature, but primarily the hardware, the GPUs, the CPUs, what happens in the memory. As Kathleen says, we chase the pixel. So we actually follow the pixel all the way from the camera through the pipeline, back through the processors, and out to the screen. So we keep an eye on, that sounds funny, but keep our self-aware of the camera technologies, all the stuff in the pipeline, display technologies. And I wanted to add that Kathleen also tracks rendering software.
Oh, that's right.
We focus on the pixel, but we do that from the basis of how it really gets started. And so we started looking at GPUs even before there were GPUs, before they were called graphics controllers. And then we found that that was being influenced by what the CPU was doing. And then we found that that was being influenced by the memory. And so it became this whole gestalt of stuff that goes into building a computer. And this could be a computer that you have in your pocket, or a computer that you have on your desk, or a giant supercomputer that is sitting in a cloud somewhere. But then we realized, as good as that hardware was, it wasn't any good if it didn't have good software. So then we had to find out, well, how's the software working? And how is that influencing hardware, and vice versa?
Well, and the more we got into looking at the software, then we had reason to contact the software companies, and they want to know where the hardware's going. They want to know, like, how much to rely on the say the CPU or the GPU, and they needed to know the level of CPUs and GPUs that are out there in the market. Which, ironically, we were always found ourselves preaching that you've got to do more. You've got to take more advantage of this wonderful hardware that's out there. And of course, there's always that tension of trying to reach the largest base. And so software companies have tended to hold back. But so there are areas like CAD or content creation that are stressing the hardware to a great extent.
There's an interesting irony that goes with this, and that is that years ago, I mean maybe 8 or 9, could be as many as 10 years ago, I was preaching to the software companies, you have got to embrace the GPU. The GPU is this super powerful SIMD multi-processor parallel processing engine, and you can accelerate your software so much if you would just engage it, take use of it. And the software guys would tell me, yeah, John, that's a great idea, we'll get around to it someday. Well, now they've gotten around to it, and they're accelerating stuff like crazy, except that at the same time, ray tracing has come in. Ray tracing doesn't work well on a semi-processor like a GPU. So now they're reverting back to the CPU, and we listened to a talk the other day. This one company had 5,000 CPU cores to do the rendering of a major movie, and it still took them a day per frame. We, among the many reports that we publish a report on the PC gaming industry, and in particular on the PC hardware gaming industry. Now that's a market that spans the world, and we can't go out and contact every PC gamer, every person who plays games on a PC and say, did you buy a PC recently? And if you did, why did you? And what kind did you buy? And how much did you spend? And so forth and so on. And when are you going to buy another one? There's just too many of them out there. There's 30 million of them out there. So we have to build models. And when you build a model, you're basically estimating, you're taking a little bit of a guess. You're drawing on your experience of how the markets work and what you've seen happen. But we develop a model, in this particular case, that's based on the buying habits of a class of people who have a certain discretionary income in various countries. And that's data we get secondarily from who's buying Porsches, who's buying Rolex watches, who's buying new houses, and things of this nature. And we merge all that data together to come up with a model of who's the probable person that can afford to buy a $1,000 to $2,000 computer to play games.
Well, and I think there's an interesting tension in software because the software companies, their customers in a way are perfectly happy to stay where they are. Just make something, say look at CAD. Just make something, I'll draw a building, it works, I don't need to buy the next version. But of course the software companies have to keep building and selling more. They can't stay where they are. And then in M&E you have a little bit of different problem because you always want something that looks better. You always have to keep pushing on the hardware. When the hardware gets better, you've got to push more. So we have a little bit of an advantage there in that if you know where the hardware is going, you can try to talk to the software people and find out what they think is important. Is it more important that you have this type of rendering, or are you interested in the GPU? That's one of the most interesting things we saw historically is, of course, the software people said, no, not really. We're kind of interested. We're staying with the CPUs because that's what's working, and so you do have this tension of the software companies needing to sell more and to make changes, but not so much that their users aren't going to go that way. So there's a constant conversation that has to go on, and you have to really be talking to everybody. But I would say that a lot of the companies, you have a lot of companies that are quite willing to be frank, to understand, to want to tell you where they see where they see their customers going, and you have to figure out whether they're right or telling the truth and that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on, but I think experience always helps.
Yeah, and they usually ask us to collaborate their data. They get data from their field sales offices that say they're going to sell this much or they have sold that much, and the headquarters comes to us and say, does that sound right to you? Do you think that we're really going to be able to do that? And very, very often we'll say, no, you're crazy, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. So far we haven't been fired.
What I think is interesting? It's not exactly what people are going to do. I mean, because people are always going to want more. They're going to try more. They're creative. Whatever helps their creativity, they'll embrace. Whatever's practical, they'll do. The hard part is timing. It's like, we've been talking a lot about VR, and people love VR. People loved VR 25 years ago, too, but it didn't really take off for a number of reasons. So it's timing, It was pretty easy to make some prediction saying VR will come in 5-10 years. Well, it didn't. So this time, now what do you say? You saw that, years ago. Now what do you say this time? Well, so maybe, but it sure feels like 3 to 5 years.
So there's a popular concept within the computer graphics industry known as Blind's Law. And it's named after Jim Blinn, who's the father of texture mapping and a whole bunch of other foundation algorithms. And Blinn postulated that the time to build a movie never changes regardless of Moore's law or the speed up of processors or anything else. And the faster processors go, that's fine, but it won't shorten the production cycle. And the reason it won't shorten the production cycle, according to Mr. Blinn, Dr. Blinn, is that we'll just make more beautiful pictures in the same time frame. So that's the reason it became Blinn's law. Well, what Kathleen and I are observing this year, and it is this year, is that Blinn's law may be broken. Production cycles actually are shrinking a little bit. And when you speak to the production people in the studios, they attribute it to technology, that they're able to do things faster, that the software that they're using is less complicated and more efficient, that the processors go faster, and of course the price of processors have come down. And so we may actually be approaching a point where we put out movies sooner and sooner and sooner. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because there is a certain amount of gestation period that the artistry has to go through to think about it. And I don't like the way that scene came out. Let's redo that one. The previs, I think, is just technology catching up with storyboarding. I mean, movies were laid out with storyboards, cartoonish type things, where the director was trying to express his ideas or her ideas about how a particular scene should look and help the lighting person, figure out where we want to put shadows and so forth. I think previs is just automating that. But that's a improvement in productivity right there, because the time it takes to draw things, even a good artist, takes time, whereas previs can happen a whole lot faster because of the mechanics of models and engines and things.
Well, but one of the things we saw, and I think we saw it last year and Gravity was a great lesson in that, though it's a far cry from live action, actually. But Gravity, in a sense, was able to integrate a lot of the previs was the viz in a way. They were doing a lot more integration of the early work that they were doing into the production, and I think you'll see more of that. That there are less sharp lines in between, say, previs and then production and post-production, so that they are more efficient. Now, we may still see Moore's Law come to the fore again, where it's great, we can just spend more time doodling with this over here, but there is at least more efficiency. And I think that we are seeing the effects of scale. When we talk about things like virtualization, where you can go ahead and put infinite numbers of processors on a job, sooner or later you're going to have to see that effect. I think the law of physics, if nothing else.
That's a good point.